Hey there, it's Silver. This is the Bloodline. This is one that I was really interested to take a look at because it just looks so fascinating. From what I can tell, it's basically going for like a kind of indie Elder Scrolls sort of idea, which is not a formula that you normally associate with being easy to make, so I was really interested to see how it was going. And then I learned it was basically being made by like mostly one person, it seems like, so that's kind of absurd, like the amount of work it would take to do something like this, but here we are. And there's also something that I want to address right out of the gate. This is an early access, of course. It's going to take a while, I'm sure, to finish, given the nature of games like these. But I don't just like to cover early access games that I think are promising, because promising is kind of a loaded word. And just because something is promising doesn't mean it's actually going to get finished. And with a game of this size, you got to be worried about that kind of thing. And I don't want to lead people astray by promoting a game and having them buy a game that ends up being abandoned. So I've tried to be a lot more careful over the last 2 or so years about what kinds of early access campaigns I'll actually cover, because I want a really good feeling and some really good groundwork that shows that this is not like a super risky prospect. And when it comes to this game, it's not just that it's promising, it's that the amount of content that's already here and playable is actually quite large, and the reason I'm showing it off like this is because I genuinely do believe in this developer, and I think that they have a lot of love for this sort of game, and they're going to do their best to realize it. And it's pretty clear from just what's here, this is not like a bare bones 0.001 alpha release with barely any content. This is actually like a playable game. So right now, what is it? Well, it is an action RPG, first person, although you can also go into third person if you wish. And this is boasting a relatively huge variety of stuff that you can do right out of the gate, and a lot of it is actually implemented already. So as of right now, this is more of a sandbox experience, and I have a feeling that it's going to remain kind of a sandboxy experience in the same way that like Oblivion is a relatively sandboxy experience, right? There is a main quest, but there's also just a crap load of other stuff for you to do, and you're not expected to just mainline the main quest real quick. You're going to be wandering around and seeing what happens for a really long time, possibly dozens of hours, and this is the same kind of formula. But I can judge a little bit about what the main quest line in this game is going to be like, because although most of it isn't implemented yet, what's actually here, I like the concept of. Basically, you seem to be this thing called the Harbinger, but the problem is, you're sort of a protector of the world that everyone's forgotten about, and no one remembers why your bloodline exists, or why the world even needs protecting, like what from. And a lot of the sort of ancient evils, that your bloodline has protected from, are so ancient that people have just sort of forgotten what they were like. And it seems like what a lot of the early main quest is going to entail is sort of identifying this invading force and understanding what it is, as well as trying to spread your influence around the various towns and have people understand why they need you still, basically, and that they need to start taking this threat seriously. And of course, there are also all kinds of other side quests and things that you can do. Even in its relatively early state at the moment, there's a good variety of different side quests, from the usual go here and get me 10 of these, to some more esoteric quests involving having to learn how to craft certain things and stuff like that, because there are some crafting systems in the game, like cooking and smithing and stuff. And also, one element that surprised me, there's going to be some kingdom building in this game. There's a pretty good groundwork for it already. Basically, outside of your Harbinger stronghold, there's a bunch of destroyed plots of land, and you can go to these plots and start building your own stuff. You can also build decorations and fences and stuff wherever you want outside of your big castle and make it look however you'd like. And each plot you can choose from all sorts of different buildings, from wizards' towers to necromancer, blood altars, to bakers, and all sorts of things like that, and you can plop them down and start building them, and they each take different kinds of resources that you can gather in the world, so it gives you a reason to gather a bunch of these more mundane resources, rather than them just being about like early game crafting materials that you're not going to need anymore. Now they actually have a use into the late game, because you're going to be using them to build up your kingdom and actually flesh it out with more different kinds of stores and NPCs and stuff like that, which I think is a really good idea. The game also has an Elder Scrolls-like skill system, where you have all sorts of different skills that govern your attributes, and they raise simply by using them. So attacking things with a longsword will raise your one-handed weapon skill. A wall running will raise your wall running skill. Yes, you can wall run. The game doesn't tell you this, but you can. There's even a jumping skill, and I seriously hope that it gets as ridiculous as like Morrowind and Oblivion's acrobatics skill. I really hope it gets to that level. And every time you level up a skill, it will improve it in some way, as well as give you some general character experience. You'll also get this general experience simply by doing quests and killing enemies and things. And once you level up, the level up effect is really cool in this game, by the way. It's like a sort of expanding sphere of light that collapses back in on you. It's a really cool effect. You will get to choose a couple of different things to increase. I have a feeling this was inspired by games like Skyrim, where you have like your health, magicka, or stamina to increase. It's kind of a similar system. And you'll also get a skill point, and this is a really cool thing. This is actually my favorite part of the game. There are a lot of different combat skills that you can invest in, like hundreds of them. So you've got an entire skill tree for every different kind of skill. So one-handed weapons, two-handed weapons, electromancy, blood magic, they all have an entire skill tree associated with them, and you spend these level up skill points on them to unlock new active skills that you can equip and use in combat. And these are actually really fun. So time to talk about the combat. The combat is quite polished, like unexpectedly so. I didn't expect it to feel quite so weighty and good already, because that's not like meant to be an insult towards the developer or anything. It's just that first-person combat is difficult to get right. It's a hard line between like sort of whacking people with pool noodles and stuff that actually feels weighty and satisfying. And this manages to actually feel pretty good. The animations are nice. They sort of screen shake on a lot of the skill effects. It's done tastefully, like it's a little bit of shake, enough to add some weight to the impact but not be obnoxious, stuff like that. And you'll find that a lot of the skills are just really fun to use. From like huge, heavy forward thrusts that send ragdolls flying across the entire world, to like these really cool dash attacks that have like a delayed slashing effect behind you, like Judgment Cut style, to all sorts of different magic disciplines. There are a lot of different kinds of magic in this game, and they've all been really fun to interact with so far. One thing I want to say, this game has one of the coolest interpretations of blood magic I've seen in a game, because it actually lets you use the enemy's blood to fuel your spells and not just your own. This is something that always bothered me about blood magic in a lot of games. It's usually presented as this like horribly evil magic that sucks the life out of everything around you, but when you actually get to use it, you exclusively hurt yourself with it and no one else, basically. So I like the fact that this game actually lets you draw the blood magic spells out of the enemies around you in order to cast them. The blood magic skill tree does need a little extra work. A lot of the skill trees aren't finished yet. They still have a good amount of variety of skills in them, but they're not all completely done. And the blood magic in particular is obviously in an earlier state, because some of them don't quite work like you would think. Some of them don't do damage when they should. The idea that sometimes drawing blood out of an enemy to fuel a spell doesn't actually hurt them is kind of weird. And of course, the blood magic skill that doesn't actually seem to level up, like it doesn't gain any experience from casting blood magic spells yet. But, that's just one of those things that'll come in time. There's also the necromancy tree, which is super cool and has some really neat spells to use, as well as a couple of unique mechanics involving, like, gathering souls and things. It's a really, like, involved magic system. I really like the magic in this game and how different each tree is. It doesn't feel like just different flavors of the same thing. Like, pyromancy is just reddish-colored magic, and cryomancy is just bluish color. Like, there's a lot more variety mechanically that makes them all feel very unique, and I appreciate that. There are also several other trees that aren't currently available yet, and an entire page of trees, that being the technology trees, which I'm pretty sure are going to be things like sort of engineering skills and the ability to use drones and turrets and stuff, so that'll be some really interesting stuff once that's added. There are already like hundreds of items in the game from all sorts of different types of armor that affect your movement speed and your like stamina cost for sprinting and stuff, I'm pretty sure, as well as of course the protection they give you. And you can mix and match a lot of different parts of the armor, from like pauldrons to boots to gauntlets and all that stuff, so you do have like an almost Morrowind level of like armor customization in terms of what you wear, which is super cool. And there's also tons and tons of weapons, like a lot of different weapons, some really neat stuff, including some guns and like muskets and blunderbusses and stuff like that, which I didn't expect. But also, of course, things like bows and crossbows, and many types of swords and maces and axes, one- and two-handed varieties, absolutely gigantic, ridiculous swords, or more sensible, smaller swords, whatever you want. They're all here, and I appreciate the relatively absurd amount of equipment variety that's already available, because that's exactly the sort of thing I like to look for in a game like this. It reminds me of like a modded Skyrim equipment variety. That's a very good thing, by the way. That's said as a compliment. I also have to wonder, speaking of, if this game is going to support modding in any big way, because of its pretty simplistic art style. I think that mods would be a really good idea, because it wouldn't be that difficult to model and texture stuff because of how the game looks. It wouldn't take all that much work, really, and you could add all kinds of stuff to this game, I have a feeling. I'm sure, you know, if they do plan on having modding support, that's going to be a little bit later, because the actual framework for the game needs to be finished first. But still, that is something that I would definitely encourage them to look into if they may or may not actually have plans for it later on. I should also mention this game does not actually use a single contiguous open world, but rather it uses smaller open worlds that are connected together via this sort of world map that you walk around on, almost like a JRPG. You walk around on this world map, and then you can zoom into each various town or each wilderness area or ruin or tomb or what have you, and they all have differently sized areas around them that you can walk around in and gather resources and dungeon delve and all sorts of stuff like that. So the exploration in this game is really good so far. There's a lot of differently textured and different looking areas to find. Stuff doesn't feel copy-paste, despite the size of the game already. And I have also noticed this game has a really good sense of scale. Like, the tombs and other, like, monolithic structures feel huge. Like, the ceilings are really big. I'm not sure exactly how the developer did it, but a lot of the big arches and gateways and stuff into these larger tomb areas, they feel gigantic. And in terms of all of this, the variety of, like, you know, dungeon delving content and stuff, it's pretty good so far. You can find some really cool loot, like not only interesting weapons and stuff because of how many there are, but also you can find skill books that'll teach you new skills you otherwise couldn't get. And a lot of these are really cool, like the ability to summon skeletons you might find in a graveyard, or you might climb a tower and find a spell book that lets you turn into a sphinx cat and walk around as a cat. It's some really cool rewards like that are exactly what I'm looking for in a game like this to make exploration rewarding and interesting. So I would definitely encourage the developer to keep up with things like that, right? Keep allowing me to find cool, unique treasures and really cool, obscure skills and weird weaponry and stuff like that in all these out-of-the-way areas, because it makes all that exploration feel good. You want that crowning moment at the end of delving through a dungeon that you didn't have to go to, but just had fun finding, and then you end up finding something really cool at the end. That's the sort of feeling that I play games like this for. That's what I want, you know, that's what I'm looking for. And so far, even in its early state, this game has done a really good job of providing a lot of that sort of gameplay. I also like the fact that there are tons of little mini games in this game. So like all of the resource gathering and stuff has its own mini game. Like chopping a tree has like a timing based one. Fishing has its own. A lot of the other gathering professions, you know, have their own, but foraging does not, which makes sense because you're just bending down and like ripping up some mushrooms or whatever. That doesn't need a mini game every time you do it. That would be a little annoying. But even stuff like smithing has a mini game, and then the how well you do in the mini game actually determines the overall improvement of stats and value of what you create and things. The potion making is also really interesting because it's oddly in-depth. Like the way that you can prepare ingredients, you can like burn them or chop them or grind them and all sorts of things, and each ingredient has like 5 different variants because of all the different things you can do with it and what it'll actually do when you make it into a potion. So it's actually like a really complex alchemy system that I'm going to have a lot of fun delving into once there's a lot more ingredients and stuff. So overall, the Bloodline is an extremely promising prospect that has managed to deliver a really interesting indie take on a familiar sort of action RPG formula, kind of like an Elder Scrolls game-ish, but with a lot of its own ideas and its own identity. And I think it's going to be one of those like indie darlings that once it gets a few updates and gets a little bit more polished, a little bit more content, it's going to get picked up by some like really famous YouTubers here and there, and it's going to explode in popularity. I feel like this is one of those games. So I'll definitely be keeping you posted. I'll, you know, put some updated videos up once the game has accrued several updates to show you some new stuff and things like that, and I'll be keeping an eye on it because I have a really good feeling about this one, and I enjoy very much what's already here. The focus is in the right place, in my opinion. The focus on rewarding exploration, the focus on tons of cool skills to use, all that stuff, that's all the kind of thing that I really enjoy this genre for. So yeah, I'll put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for the Bloodline so that you can go and check it out yourselves. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.